The chorus of minds was a place of perfect resonance. A symphony of thought played across the psychic architecture of the conclave. Here, within the non-space that bound 77 elder species, reality was a matter of consensus, and history was a song they all sang together. Arbiter Kalen drifted in that luminous tide, his crystalline form a mere anchor for a consciousness that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires as fleeting notes in an eternal composition. He felt the bureaucratic hum of the glypt, the cold, mathematical logic of the omicrons, and the verdant, sprawling thoughts of the Sylvanesti. And then there was the human note, a recent addition to the chorus, barely a millennium old, yet it was a sound unlike any other. It wasn't a pure tone, but a chaotic chord, a jumble of ambition, sentiment, logic, and a fierce, guarded privacy that always seemed to hold something back. Kalen found it fascinating. He was the conclave's chief ethnologist and historian, and humanity was his most compelling and frustrating study. He was filtering a report on the latest human-designed logistical algorithms, the elegant, self-correcting systems that now manage the flow of 90% of the galaxy's raw resources when the human ambassador, Eva Rostova, manifested her presence before him. She appeared as she always did, an aging woman with eyes that held the placid depth of a frozen lake, her mind a quiet island in the roaring sea of the chorus. She had served for 60 standard years. There's a stoic and reliable presence, known more for her efficiency than her rhetoric. Arbiter Kalen. Her thought voice was calm, devoid of the usual respectful deference. It was as flat and final as a closing door. Kalen focused his attention, the swirling colors of the chorus coalescing around her placid form. Ambassador Rostova. An unscheduled visit. Is there an issue with the tithes from the Sol system? Her next thought was not directed at him, but at the chorus itself. A broadcast so clear and sharp it cut through every other song. The contract is concluded. And then she was gone. Not faded, not withdrawn, vanished. In the same instant, the human chord within the chorus of minds ceased to exist. It wasn't a silence. It was a void, a sudden, gaping wound in the fabric of their collective consciousness where a universe of thought had just been. A psychic shockwave of pure nothingness ripped through the conclave, a silent scream of severance that left ancient minds reeling. Kalen felt the abrupt absence like a physical blow, a fundamental law of his reality suddenly repealed. Panic, a dissonant shriek of terror and confusion, erupted from 100 billion minds at once. The glypt's bureaucratic hum became a frantic buzz of unanswered queries. The Omicron's perfect logic fractured into paradoxes. The Sylvanesti's verdant thoughts withered as if touched by frost. The galaxy's operating system had just been deleted. On the physical plane, the chaos was instantaneous and absolute. Across 1,000,000 worlds, the lights began to flicker. FTL drives, their core navigation matrices designed and maintained by human engineers, refused to engage. Their control interfaces displaying a single cryptic sigil, a stylized Ouroboros biting its own tail. The galactic markets, governed by human predictive algorithms that had stabilized economies for centuries, flatlined into null values, erasing quadrillions in assets in a single moment. Automated planetary defense grids, coded by human programmers to protect vassal worlds, simply went dark. Humanity had not declared war. They had not issued threats or made demands. They had simply unplugged themselves from the universe, and in doing so, revealed that they were not just a part of the machine, they were the power cord. Kalen was thrown from the chaos of the chorus back into his physical body, a towering, multifaceted crystalline form housed in the mediation chamber on the Conclave's Nexus world. Alarms, real and psychic, blared around him. He was immediately summoned by the Emergency Directorate, a grim council of the 10 oldest species. Their thought voices were frayed with a terror he had never witnessed. "They have crippled us," hissed the glipped over-coordinator, its insectoid mind racing. "This is an act of war. It is an act of logic," countered the Omicron Prime, its own thoughts struggling for cohesion. A system cannot function without its core axioms. The humans were an axiom we failed to define. Kalen was tasked with the impossible re-establish contact. Understand the why. He was the expert, the one who had spent centuries studying them, who had shared long, philosophical debates with Eva Rostova in the quiet corners of the chorus. He had believed they shared a mutual respect, a genuine curiosity. Now he saw that belief for what it was, a comforting illusion. He tried every channel, every quantum-entangled comm, every psychic frequency he knew. Nothing. It was like shouting into a soundproofed tomb. The entire human sphere of influence, a vast and burgeoning arm of the galaxy, was surrounded by a wall of absolute silence. Probes sent toward their borders simply vanished from all sensor readings the moment they crossed a certain invisible line. The galaxy did not descend into war. It began to decay. Starfaring civilizations found themselves stranded, their fleets unable to jump, their trade routes severed. Worlds dependent on off-world food shipments began to starve. Medical technologies reliant on human-patented biotech began to fail. It was a slow, grinding collapse, the death of 1,000 cuts administered by an enemy who wasn't even there. The Conclave's most arrogant members, the Lythar, refused to accept this new reality. A species of pure energy beings encased in elegant chrome shells. They were master technologists, but their vast intellect had always been hampered by a lack of resources, a problem that human logistics had conveniently solved for them. Now, their society was imploding. "Their data is our data," the Lythar technocrat broadcast to the frantic conclave. "They built the archives, but the knowledge belongs to the galaxy. We will take it back." They targeted a human data nexus, a moon-sized archive named Mnemosiny, orbiting a dead star in the borderlands. It was one of thousands that served as a repository for everything from public stellar cartography to restricted conclave historical records, all managed and curated by human archivists. Kalen felt a spike of cold dread. He projected a warning directly to the Lythar fleet commander. "This is a mistake. Their silence is deliberate. It is a message. Do not provoke a response you cannot comprehend." The technocrat's reply was steeped in arrogance. "They have left their libraries undefended. Arbiter, that is not a message. It is an invitation." The Lythar fleet, 100 shimmering vessels of chrome and light, arrived at Mnemosiny. The archive moon was dark, showing no power signatures, no defensive emplacements, no signs of life. It floated in the void like a skull. The Lythar deployed their ethereal hacking probes, streams of pure data designed to phase through physical matter and forcibly extract information. Kalen watched through a long-range psychic observatory, his entire being clenched in anticipation. He expected weapons to fire, shields to flare, a battle to ensue. He was wrong. The moment the Lythar data streams touched Mnemosiny's outer shell, the archive did not activate defenses. It opened a connection. It welcomed them in. And then it gave them exactly what they wanted. For a fraction of a second, The Lythar fleet was bathed in a silent, ghostly light as every byte of information from the archive poured into their ship minds and, through them, into their species-wide neural network. It was not just the public data they sought, it was everything. The history of their own species, which the humans had so meticulously archived. Their scientific breakthroughs, their cultural epics, their genetic codex. Everything they were, everything they had ever been, was reflected back at them from the human mirror. And then the mirror shattered. It was a logic bomb of impossible elegance and cruelty. Embedded within the data stream was a recursive paradox, a philosophical virus targeted at the core of Lythar consciousness. It was a simple, self-referential question that their rigidly logical minds were incapable of resolving, and it was tied directly to their own archive data. If a complete record of a thing exists, is the thing itself still necessary? The paradox looped, accelerated, and overwrote. It was not a deletion of data. It was a retroactive negation of existence across the galaxy. The psychic presence of the Lythar, their song in the chorus, screamed. It was a sound of a billion minds simultaneously discovering they were nothing more than a copy of a file that was now being erased. Their chrome shells went inert. Their energy forms dissipated into cosmic radiation. Their history, their science, their very memory vanished not only from the archive but from the universe itself. The Conclave felt a species die, not in fire and war, but in a silent, cognitive execution. Menemozani went dark again. Its purpose served. Kalen stared into the void where the Lythar fleet had been, the psychic echo of their extinction fading around him. He finally understood. This was not a negotiation. It was not a withdrawal. It was a culling. Humanity had judged them. And on the human homeworld, in a quiet, subterranean chamber far from the eyes of any alien, an old man known only as the Curator watched a single rune on his display shift from amber to green. He took a sip of tea, his face impassive. Phase 1 was complete. The galaxy was now quiet enough for the real work to begin. He had spent a century weaving humanity into the tapestry of the galaxy, making them essential. Now he would spend another century carefully pulling the threads, watching the whole thing unravel according to his design. This was not about power. It was about sanitation. The void where the Lythar had sung their song of logic and light was not empty. It was a wound in the chorus of minds, a psychic lesion that radiated a palpable wrongness. To the remaining members of the Conclave, it felt like staring at a portrait from which a figure had been perfectly excised, leaving behind not just a blank space, but the chilling certainty that the figure was never there to begin with. The Glipt Over-Coordinator tried to file an official report on the extinction, but its bureaucratic mind stalled on a fundamental paradox. How does one document the end of a species whose historical records, by the very nature of their demise, now proved they had never existed? The attempt drove 3 Glipt analysis drones to irreversible insanity. The Omicrons, in a desperate act of self-preservation, quarantined all philosophical inquiry. Their perfect logic now a cage, they dared not rattle for fear of discovering another fatal question. Fear had mutated, was no longer the fear of an enemy's power, but the terror of an enemy's understanding. The humans had not just built a better weapon, they had weaponized reality itself. Kalen felt the galaxy's slow death through the chorus. He felt the hunger of a billion beings on Agri-World Beta, whose atmospheric processors, all running on human-designed core logic, had begun converting nitrogen to inert argon, slowly suffocating the planet's biosphere. He felt the panic of the starship, unblinking eye, a conclave science vessel, now adrift in interstellar space, its FTL drive locked by an algorithm that had, without warning, reclassified its destination as a temporal paradox, refusing to engage. These were not acts of malice. They were the cold, calculated consequences of a system having its cornerstone removed. The fail-safes, the error messages, the final protocols, they were all working exactly as their human designers had intended. It was a slow, systemic execution, and the galaxy was the condemned. It was the Sylvanesti matriarch who finally broke through the Conclave's paralysis. Her people were symbiotic with their homeworld, a single planet-spanning forest that thought and felt as one. Her thought voice was not a structured transmission, but a wave of pure, organic agony that washed over the chorus. Arbiter Kaelin, our world, it weeps, she projected, her consciousness a tapestry of wilting leaves and drying riverbeds. The weave is failing. The weave was a continent-spanning network of bioengineered flora that regulated the planet's climate, a gift from human xenobotanists 2 centuries prior in exchange for Sylvanesti insights into psychic resonance. It was a masterpiece of symbiotic technology, but it required constant, subtle adjustments from a central regulatory system, a human system. The atmospheric humidity drops by a full percentage point each cycle. The matriarch's thoughts continued, laced with the scent of dust and decay. The northern jungles are turning to tinder. The great banyan, the heart of our world mind, is shedding its leaves. We have tried to interface with the core regulator, but it does not respond to us. It asks for a key, an authorization code we do not possess. It tells us the licensed operational period has expired. Kaelin felt a profound sorrow. The Sylvanesti were pacifists, poets, gardeners. They had never participated in the Conclave's political games. They were, by any sane measure, innocent, and their innocence meant nothing. What would you have me do? Matriarch, Kaelin projected gently. We have no way to reach them. You spoke with her, the matriarch whispered, a rustle of dying hope. The human, Ava Rostova. You were her friend. You must have seen something, some flicker of their motive, a way to appeal to them. They are not monsters. They gave us the weave. They saved our world once. Why would they let it die now? The question hung in the chorus, a testament to a galaxy that still could not comprehend the scale of the paradigm shift. They were still thinking in terms of friendship, of politics, of leverage. They did not understand that they were no longer part of the equation, deep within the Sol system, shielded from all forms of cosmic detection by layers of space-time distortion. The curator stood before a holographic representation of the Milky Way. It was not a map of stars and planets, but of information flow, a shimmering web of light. A young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes stood beside him. Her formal title was Observer, but her name was Alara. The Sylvanesti homeworld is approaching a critical desiccation point, she reported, her voice calm and even. Ecological collapse is projected within 40 standard cycles. Their psychic distress is significant. The curator made a small, dismissive gesture. Distress is the catalyst for change. The weave was a crutch. It made them complacent, dependent. If their world mind is as resilient as their biology suggests, it will adapt or it will perish. Either outcome is acceptable. And the agri-world, Alara asked. Starvation is not an elegant solution. It is not a solution. Observer, it is a filter. The curator corrected her gently, his gaze fixed on the dying lights of the galactic web. We are not killing them. We are merely removing the systems that allowed their populations to grow beyond their own means. We are restoring a natural balance they abandoned centuries ago. Phase 2 is not about punishment. It is about pruning a garden that has become overgrown with weeds. He gestured to a small isolated cluster of stars far out on the galactic rim, a region that glowed with a steady, independent light on his map. Look there, the Cathar Confederacy, a minor species, barely warp capable. We gave them nothing. We asked for nothing. They have no FTL drives of our design, no economic algorithms, no biotech. When we went silent, they did not even notice. They continue to thrive, self-sufficient and unnoticed. They are not a weed. Alara was silent for a moment. So, the goal is to break the conclave, to shatter their dependence and see who survives the fall. Precisely, the curator said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips. We held this galaxy in our hands for a millennium. We gave it stability, prosperity, peace, and in return, they gave us stagnation. They used our tools not to reach for the stars, but to cushion their thrones. They became parasites, Kalen and his conclave, and a host, if it wishes to survive, must eventually burn the parasites off. He turned to her, his ancient eyes holding a cold, clear fire. Watch the Arbiter. He is the last one who still thinks this is a conversation. His next move will be the most interesting. Kalen knew his time was running out. The conclave was fracturing. The warlike species, the ones who had been held in check only by human-mediated treaties, were beginning to test their neighbors' collapsing defenses. Soon, the galaxy would be consumed by 1,000 petty wars, a firestorm of desperation from which no one would emerge. Force was useless. Logic was fatal. Diplomacy was impossible. But the Sylvanesti matriarch's plea had sparked an idea, a desperate, illogical path born of his long study of humanity. They were not just logicians and engineers. They were sentimentalists, historians, creatures of powerful myth and memory. They revered their own past with an almost religious fervor. He could not appeal to their reason, but perhaps he could appeal to their memory. I will go to them, Kalen announced to the stunned directorate. Alone. Suicide, hissed the glipped-over coordinator. They will unmake you as they did the Lathar. The Lathar went as thieves, Kalen countered, his crystalline form resonating with conviction. I will go as a pilgrim. I will not go to their homeworld or their fortresses. I will go to Vesper's Landing. A hush fell over the directorate. Vesper's Landing was a name from the history books. A tiny, atmospherically unstable moon orbiting a gas giant in an unremarkable system. It was the site of humanity's first peaceful contact with an alien species, the long-extinct Vespers. The event was a cornerstone of human interstellar history, a moment they celebrated as the beginning of their galactic journey. It was a place of symbolic importance only. It held no strategic value. It is a dead rock, the Omicron Prime stated. There will be no one there. The place itself is the message, Kalen insisted. I will travel in a vessel of Vespertine design, a relic from the museum on the Nexus. I will transmit no weapon signatures, no complex data. I will approach their sacred ground, not as a representative of the conclave they have abandoned, but as a historian, an equal who remembers the promise of that first day. The journey was an ordeal. The Vespertine vessel was slow, its navigation primitive, forcing Kalen to plot a course through treacherous, unmapped gravitational tides. He was utterly alone. cut off from the chorus, a single mind adrift in an increasingly hostile universe. After weeks of travel that felt like eons, he arrived. The system was just as the archives described it. The gas giant was a swirling ball of violet and orange, and orbiting it was the small gray moon, Vesper's Landing. It was silent. No ships, no stations, no signals. Just as the Omicron had predicted, Kalen piloted the antique ship into a low, stable orbit. With a tremor of trepidation that vibrated through his entire being, he opened a single low-power communications channel and broadcast a simple plain text message in archaic human English, a language he had studied for decades. He did not send a plea or a demand. He sent a line from an ancient human poem, one he and Eva Rostova had once spent an entire cycle debating the meaning of. It was a line about memory, loss, and the hope of finding meaning in silence. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep. He sent the message once, and then he waited in the crushing, absolute silence. He did not know if he expected a response or a silent, sudden death for a full rotation of the moon. There was nothing. Then, on his simple console, a single line of text appeared. It was in the same archaic English. The message was not from a fleet command or an automated system. It was personal, direct, and it chilled him to his core. "We see you, Arbiter. The promises were broken long ago. Now, we have new ones to make. Land." The descent was an act of pure faith. Kalen's Vespertine relic, a craft designed for gentle atmospheric jaunts, shuddered as it pierced the thin, turbulent shell of Vesper's Landing. The moon's surface was a panorama of windswept gray dust and jagged rock formations, unchanged in the millennium since the first recorded contact. There were no landing lights, no docking bays, no signs of infrastructure. There was only a single, faint energy beacon, the source of the reply, emanating from a shallow crater near the terminator line. As he brought the ship down, its ancient landing struts groaning in protest, he saw it. It was not a fortress or a communications array. It was a statue, carved from the moon's native obsidian rock. It depicted two figures in a handshake, a towering, slender Vesper with its characteristic tripedal stance, and a shorter, bipedal human in a primitive environmental suit. It was a monument to the moment that had launched humanity into the galactic community, the very promise they had now so thoroughly renounced. He landed the ship a respectful distance away. The moon's atmosphere was a toxic cocktail of methane and ammonia, but Kalen's crystalline form was immune to such environmental concerns. He extended the ramp and walked out onto the desolate surface, the low gravity lending an unnerving buoyancy to his steps. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, high-pitched whistle of the wind scouring the plains of dust. A figure was waiting for him at the base of the statue. It was a single human, clad in a sleek, arm-fitting black suit that seemed to drink the dim light. The helmet was opaque, a featureless obsidian mirror that reflected Kalen's own multifaceted form back at him. It was impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman, young or old. The figure stood perfectly still, radiating an aura of calm, lethal patience. "Arbiter Kalen," a voice spoke, not through a radio, but directly inside Kalen's mind. The psychic voice was not like Eva Rostova's calm pool of thought. It was a honed weapon, precise and unadorned. It was the voice of the observer. "Alara, the curator is pleased you appreciate history. It is a rare trait in your conclave." Kalen stopped, his thoughts a whirlwind of protocol, diplomacy, and a deep, primal caution. This was not a negotiation. It was a summons. I came to understand, Kalen projected, keeping his own thoughts as simple and direct as possible. The galaxy you helped build is dying. Species who called you friends are facing extinction. Why this silence? This abandonment. Alara took a slow step forward, the gray dust barely stirring under her boots. We have abandoned nothing. We have simply stopped carrying the weight of a galaxy that refused to walk on its own. You call it abandonment. We call it an audit. Her thought voice was devoid of malice. It was the voice of a scientist stating an inarguable fact. Your conclave, Arbiter, became a monument to its own inertia. For centuries, every crisis, every famine, every petty squabble was brought to our door. We provided the FTL drives, but you never explored new principles of physics. We gave you the economic models, and you used them to entrench wealth, not eliminate poverty. I arbitrated your wars, and you learned nothing of peace, only of dependency. It gave you 1,000 years of stability, and you used it to sleep. She gestured toward the silent statue. This monument doesn't commemorate a friendship. It commemorates a transaction. The Vespers gave us the star charts that led us to the galaxy. In return, we gave them technology that outpaced their social evolution, and within 3 generations, their culture had consumed itself. It was our first and most profound mistake. We learned from it. The Conclave did not. Kalen felt the foundations of his mission crumbling. He had come prepared for an argument with a hostile power. He was facing a verdict from a superior one. The Sylvanesti, Kalen pleaded, forcing the name into the cold space between them. They are blameless. Their world dies because a contract you wrote has expired. Is that justice? Justice is a concept for equals, Alara stated, her voice unwavering. This is a matter of consequences. The Sylvanesti embraced a gift they did not understand and allowed their own world mind to become reliant on an external system. A truly symbiotic relationship strengthens both parties. Theirs was a parasitic one. We are the host. We are performing debridement. The pain is regrettable, but necessary for our own health. She began to walk, a slow circle around Kalen, her mirrored helmet scanning his crystalline form as if assessing a museum piece. You, Arbiter, are the most fascinating part of this audit. You study us. You quote our poets. You understand our history better than most of your colleagues. You see us not as a tool, but as a culture, a people. And yet, you are still bound by the Conclave's fundamental flaw. You believe your existence is a right, not a privilege. And who grants this privilege? Kalen asked, his own thoughts tinged with a cold anger. You, the curator. The universe does. Alara replied. The universe rewards resilience, adaptation, and self-sufficiency. It has little patience for anything else. We are merely agents of that impatience. We are correcting a market inefficiency on a galactic scale. Kalen felt a wave of despair so profound it threatened to destabilize his physical matrix. There was no argument to be made. They were operating from a set of axioms so far removed from the conclaves that it was like a 2-dimensional being trying to debate a 3-dimensional one. They were not angry. They were disappointed, and their disappointment was apocalyptic. Then there is no hope. Kalen projected, the thought a shard of glass in his own mind. You will simply watch us burn. Alara stopped her circling and stood directly before him. Her helmeted face was just inches from his. Hope is not a passive resource. Arbiter. It is a manufactured commodity. We are not watching you burn solely. We are watching to see who learns to build a fire of their own. Most will fail. The Glypt will drown in their own paperwork. The Omicron will trap themselves in logic loops. The warlords will exhaust their resources fighting ghosts. They are evolutionary dead ends, propped up for too long by our generosity. But some, she continued, and for the first time, a flicker of something new entered her psychic voice, not warmth, but a keen, analytical interest. Some may survive. They will be forced to innovate, to reinvent, to become something more than they were. The Sylvanesti might rediscover the deep magic of their own world mind instead of relying on our technology. The Cathar, out on the rim, continue to thrive because they were never part of the system. They are the control group in this experiment. She raised a hand and gently touched Kalen's crystalline surface. Her glove was cool and smooth. The contact sent a jolt of pure information through him. Not a message, but a data packet, a seed of an idea planted directly into his consciousness. It was a complex schematic, a fragment of a theory on psychic resonance and zero-point energy, something far beyond current conclave science. It was elegant, beautiful, and utterly terrifying in its potential. "This is not an offer, Arbiter." Alara's voice was a soft whisper in his mind. "It is not a solution we are giving you. It is a clue. You came here seeking a conversation with the past. We are offering you a glimpse of a possible future. What you and your conclave do with it will be your own final examination." And with that, she turned and walked away, her form swallowed by the gray twilight. A moment later, a silent, black shuttle, a vessel that had been perfectly cloaked from all his senses, rose from a nearby crater and vanished into the void. Kalen was alone again on the dead moon, standing before a monument to a broken promise. But he was no longer just an arbiter of a dying order. He was the bewildered recipient of a terrible and magnificent gift. The data seed in his mind pulsed with alien knowledge. It was a key, but a key to a door he did not know existed. A door that might lead to salvation or to an even more profound damnation. Humanity had not given them a weapon to fight back. They had given them the equation for fire and left them to discover for themselves how not to get burned. The choice, for the first time in a millennium, was theirs. Kalen returned to the Conclave Nexus not as an emissary bearing terms of surrender, but as a prophet carrying a cryptic gospel. The journey back was a blur of focused meditation as he turned the data seed from Alara over and over in his mind. It was not just a schematic, it was a philosophical treatise written in the language of physics. It spoke of consciousness not as a byproduct of biology, but as a fundamental force of the universe, capable of shaping space-time if channeled with sufficient coherence and will. It was the science of the chorus of minds, but elevated to a terrifying new level. The humans hadn't just mastered psychic communication, they had weaponized it, industrialized it, and built their silent empire upon its principles. The Conclave, by comparison, had been children finger-painting on a cave wall. His arrival was met with a storm of desperate psychic inquiries. The Directorate demanded answers. Had he negotiated a truce? Were the humans making demands? Could the collapse be halted? Kalen silenced them with a single resonant projection that echoed with the cold authority he had learned on Vesper's Landing. "There are no negotiations," he stated, his thought voice cutting through the chaos. "Humanity is not an adversary to be defeated or a partner to be placated. They are a selective pressure, an extinction event of their own design. The collapse will not be halted. It is the new state of being. We have been placed in the crucible. We will either be forged into something new, or we will be rendered to slag." He unveiled the data seed. He did not present it as a gift, but as a burden, a single and terrifying question posed to them all. The Omicron Prime, the galaxy's foremost logician, was the first to analyze the core equations. After 3 cycles of unbroken communion with the data, it projected a single chilling conclusion to the Directorate. The theory is sound. It posits that a sufficiently unified collective consciousness can create a localized reality bubble, a space where physical laws can be temporarily amended. It is, for all intents and purposes, the engineering of miracles. However, the Omicron paused, its perfect logic straining against the implications. The energy requirements are astronomical. To achieve even the smallest sustainable effect, say, reactivating a single FTL drive would require the focused, synchronized mental output of an entire species for a prolonged period. And any dissonance, any single mind falling out of tune would cause the effect to collapse, with catastrophic, unpredictable consequences. The Glipt Overcoordinator immediately began calculating the organizational challenges, its mind reeling. Impossible to synchronize the thoughts of billions of individuals, it would require the complete subjugation of individual will. It is the end of culture, of self, of everything we are. Precisely, Kalen projected, the terrible weight of his understanding settling over the conclave. That is the choice, to cling to the sovereignty of the self and perish in isolation, or to sacrifice that self for the survival of the collective. The humans did not just leave us. They left us a mirror. They have shown us the price of their own ascendance. The revelation shattered the remaining unity of the conclave. It was a poison pill dressed as a cure. The individualistic species, the proud warrior clans, the fiercely independent merchant guilds, they saw it as a demand for a slavery of the soul. They would rather face extinction than become a mindless hive. The more communal species, however, saw a glimmer of a terrifying hope. The Sylvanesti matriarch, her world mind already a collective of sorts, was the first to embrace the new paradigm. Her thought voice, though weakened by her planet's decay, resonated with a desperate resolve. Our world is dying. Our individuality is already fading with the leaves of the great banyan. We have nothing left to lose. We will attempt the unison. It began on Sylvanest, the planet's entire population, from the smallest sapling tender to the oldest root speaker, gathered at the foot of the dying great banyan. Guided by the matriarch and the principles of the human data seed, they began the arduous process of weaving their minds together. It was not a chorus, where voices sang in harmony. It was a unison, where all voices became one. A single titanic consciousness focused on a single, impossible goal to command the rain to fall. For weeks, the galaxy watched through long-range sensors as the planet Sylvanest grew quiet. Its psychic presence, once a vibrant song of life, consolidated into a single, piercingly pure note of immense power. Kalen felt it from the Nexus, a pressure building on the fabric of reality itself. Then, the reports began to trickle in from horrified conclave observation posts. The weather patterns on Sylvanest were changing, but not in the way they had hoped. The weave, the human technology they were trying to override, began to actively fight back. It recognized the unison not as a friendly command, but as a hostile system intrusion. The failsafes Carter had spoken of activated, but on a planetary scale. Drought protocols initiated with ruthless efficiency, drawing all remaining moisture from the soil and venting it into the upper atmosphere. The Sylvanesti mind, locked in its unison, redoubled its efforts, pouring its collective will into summoning the clouds. A psychic war against a legacy algorithm. The planet became a battlefield between biology and technology, between a dying species' desperate prayer and the cold, unyielding logic of its absent gods. The climax was apocalyptic. The psychic energy wielded by the Sylvanesti unison, in its final, agonized push, was immense. It did not create rain. Instead, it tore a localized rift in the planet's atmospheric membrane. The vented water vapor, held in the stratosphere by the weave, was ignited by the raw psychic energy. The sky of Sylvanest caught fire. A world-spanning inferno of superheated steam scoured the surface, flash boiling the forests and incinerating the last vestiges of life. The single, pure note of the Sylvanesti unison became a silent, instantaneous scream of a billion minds being extinguished at once. And then there was nothing. Another voice in the chorus was gone. On his observation deck within the Sol system, the curator watched the light of Sylvanest wink out on his galactic map. Alara stood beside him, her face impassive. "A failure," she stated. "Predictable. They mistook the key for a weapon," the curator murmured, a flicker of something akin to disappointment in his ancient eyes. "They tried to force the lock. The unison is not about power. Observer. It is about understanding. They did not try to harmonize with the system we gave them. They tried to conquer it. They proved they were not worthy of the gift." The destruction of Sylvanest sent a wave of absolute terror through the galaxy. The data seed was not a key to salvation, it was a loaded gun. The conclave collapsed entirely. In a single cycle, the directorate was dissolved, its members fleeing back to their home systems to hoard what little resources they had left. Alliances became meaningless. The slow decay had become a frantic, headlong plunge into utter chaos. It was every species for itself. The warlords began their wars of annihilation. The merchants became pirates. The scholars sealed their archives, preparing for a dark age they knew they would not survive. Kalen remained on the deserted Nexus, a lonely custodian of a graveyard of empires. He had delivered humanity's message, and that message had proven to be the final, fatal poison. He had believed it was a test. He now saw it was simply a tool to accelerate the inevitable. He was sitting in the silent mediation chamber, his mind a quiet sea of sorrow, when a new presence touched his consciousness. It was not human. It was not a voice from any species he knew. It was a psychic signal from the Galactic Rim, from the insignificant Cathar Confederacy. The Control Group. Their thought voice was hesitant, unused to projecting over such vast distances. It was simple, inquisitive, and utterly unafraid. "Arbiter Kalen of the Conclave," the voice asked. "We have been monitoring the energy signatures from the core worlds. The patterns are illogical. We are a young species. We do not understand what is happening. Our elders speak of a great silence that fell upon the galaxy. We would like to learn. Will you teach us?" Kalen felt a sensation he had not experienced in decades, a flicker of genuine surprise. In a galaxy that was tearing itself apart, a species that had been completely ignored was reaching out, not with a plea for help, but with a request for knowledge. They were not afraid. They were curious. He looked at the data seed still resonating within his mind. He had seen it as a choice between self and survival, between freedom and slavery. But perhaps he, too, had been wrong. Perhaps it was not about power or control. Perhaps, as the curator had said, it was about understanding. The Cathar were not part of the old system. They had no dependencies to unlearn, no arrogance to overcome. They were a blank slate. Yes. Kalen projected back across the silent stars, his voice a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "I will." The great audit was over. The pruning was complete. Now, in the ruins of the old garden, a single, unexpected seed was beginning to sprout. Of course, Here is the final part, expanded to provide a more detailed and fulfilling conclusion to the story. The Cathar Confederacy was a civilization woven from patience. Their homeworld was a tidally locked planet of endless twilight, a world that had taught them the value of slow growth and deep roots. Physically, they were stout, silicon-based beings with 6 limbs, their thoughts moving with the deliberate pace of geological time. They had no concept of empire or conquest, only of community and comprehension. They were, as Alara had noted, the perfect control group untainted by the Conclave's addiction to human technology and political maneuvering. Kalen became their Socratic paradox, a being of immense knowledge who had come to teach them that their own ignorance was their greatest strength. He did not give them answers. He taught them how to ask the right questions. He relayed the tragic epic of the Sylvanesti, not as a failure of power, but as a failure of listening. The data seed is not a tool to command reality. He explained to the Cathar elders, his thoughts translated into their slow, resonant psychic language. It is a tuning fork. The universe already has a song. The Sylvanesti tried to shout over it. You must learn to hum along with it. For generations, this was their great work. Kalen, his crystalline form timeless, became a living archive, a mentor to a species that measured progress in centuries. They did not rush to build their unison. They studied, they meditated, they spent decades simply observing the subtle gravitational fluxes of their solar system, learning the orbital mechanics not as equations, but as a kind of celestial ballet. They sent out delicate psychic probes, not to grasp or take, but simply to feel the background radiation of the cosmos, the stellar wind from their star, the subtle life song of their own planet's molten core. They learned the universe's rhythm before they ever tried to join the dance. While the Cathar learned to listen, the rest of the galaxy screamed its death rattle. The petty wars of the former Conclave members burned themselves out, leaving behind shattered worlds and scattered, feral survivors who had forgotten the stars and saw only the sky above their ruined cities. Great fleets rusted in the void, their crews long dead from starvation or infighting, becoming silent tombs drifting through the dark. The galaxy was being scoured clean, returning to a primal state of silence and darkness, punctuated only by the faint, steady light of the Cathar's small corner of space. The unison, when it finally happened, was not a dramatic event. There was no psychic shockwave, no tearing of reality's fabric. It was a moment of perfect, effortless alignment, as natural and gentle as a tide turning. One moment, the Cathar were a species of individuals, their minds like a vast field of standing stones, each a separate and ancient consciousness. The next, a soft, resonant hum connected them all, and they were a single, harmonious consciousness, a mind as large as a world, looking out at the universe through a billion pairs of eyes. They did not use their newfound state to ignite their atmosphere or reactivate a long-dead technology. They did something far more profound. Their first act was not one of power, but of communion. They reached out with their unified mind and touched the core of their own planet, the vast, slow, thinking heart of rock and metal that had birthed them. They did not command it. They asked it a simple yet reverent question: what is your song and the planet? A silent partner for millennia sang back. It was a music of immense gravity and tectonic patience, a chord of deep, resonant power that spoke of eons of formation and slow, constant change. The Cathar unison became a resonating chamber, a living amplifier that took the deep, geological music of their world and broadcasted it into the void. It was a signal of pure harmony, a testament to a species that had achieved unity not through the subjugation of will, but through the perfection of empathy. The signal contained no data, no language, only a single, inarguable truth. We are in balance. Deep in the silent heart of the Sol system, the curator stood before his galactic map. A new light had appeared on it, a soft, steady glow from the galactic rim. It did not flicker with the chaotic energy of the old conclave or pulse with the arrogant transmissions of the Lythar. It pulsed with the calm, steady rhythm of a sleeping titan's heart. Alara stood beside him, her featureless helmet tilted as if listening to a distant melody. "The control group," she stated, her psychic voice imbued with a note of something Kaelin had never heard from her professional satisfaction. "They harmonized. They did not try to conquer." The curator watched the new light for a long time, his ancient face unreadable. He had torn down a galaxy, ended civilizations, and orchestrated the extinction of trillions. He had been the architect of a dark age, all to prove a single, brutal hypothesis that dependency was a terminal illness. And there, in that soft, steady light, was his proof. "The audit is complete," he murmured, his voice as dry as dust. "The garden has been weeded. The soil is tilled. One healthy seed has taken root." He turned away from the map, his long vigil, his monstrous work, finally done. He had never sought to rule the galaxy, only to make it worthy of its own existence. His methods were an atrocity, but his goal was not. He sought a universe of peers, not dependents. "Let them grow," he said to Alara. "Let them discover the silence for themselves and decide what songs to sing into it. Our promises, the ones we made to ourselves after the Vespers, are, at last, kept." Humanity did not reemerge. Their borders remained sealed. Their silence remained absolute. But its nature had changed. It was no longer the cold, judgmental silence of abandonment. It was the warm, patient silence of a gardener, waiting to see what else might grow in the fertile darkness they had created. They had abdicated their role as managers and become observers of a new, organic galactic evolution. On the world of the Cathar, Kaelin stood on a crystalline plateau, his own form resonating gently with the planet song of his hosts. He was no longer an arbiter or a historian. He was a witness. The Cathar unison, now a permanent state of being, was looking out at the scarred and quiet galaxy. They saw the ruins, the dead worlds, the ghosts of the conclave, but they did not see an end. They saw a beginning, a vast, empty space waiting for new voices. They turned their collective consciousness to Kaelin, a wave of gratitude and serene purpose washing over him. "The garden is quiet now," they projected. "It is time to plant again. There are worlds that are silent but not dead. There may be survivors who have forgotten how to look up. Will you teach us what to grow?" Kaelin looked out at the distant, scattered stars. The fire had passed. The flood had receded. The silence of humanity was no longer a threat, but a challenge. It was a canvas, vast and empty, waiting for a new masterpiece to be painted. And for the first time in 1,000 years, in a galaxy humbled and quieted, he felt the universe was full of infinite promise. His work, in the Cathars, was just beginnings.